Hello everyone, and welcome back to today's live training. We're on week 3 of our August Full of Mondays with live events here on YouTube, and I'm really glad you could join us. I'm glad that you were able to join us for the previous 2 weeks where we talked about Vegas Pro 18, and last week when we talked about Vegas effects from the Vegas Post Suite. Today I want to talk more about Vegas Post Suite, and we're going to concentrate on Vegas Image today. Let me just check my other screen, make sure all my systems are operational here. Everything's going okay. Looks like we're good to go. So, much like last week, I don't think I'm going to be able to go into a great amount of detail with Vegas Image today, but I did want to give you a good look at it, particularly those of you who've never used it before. Maybe you've downloaded the trial and you're thinking about purchasing, or maybe you've already purchased or subscribed to Vegas Post Suite and you don't quite know where to get started with Vegas Image. So let's take a look at Vegas Image and some basics to get you started. Let me switch over to my screen here. I'm sorry, to the screen. Vegas Image is a part of Vegas Post Suite, along with Vegas Effects and Vegas Pro 18. And of course, Vegas Pro 18 now comes with SoundForge Pro 14. So this is really a powerful package of audio and video editing tools. And we're going to concentrate more on Vegas Pro in the next couple of weeks and talk about more specifically about some of the features that are new in Vegas Pro 18. Last week we talked about Vegas Effects. This week, let's take a look at Vegas Image. Here's just a quick look at some of the major new features of Vegas Image. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but you can see that there are some healing brush things going on, better interoperability within the Vegas Post Suite family, some contrast and toning effects, and so forth. So those are kind of the major new features. But let's take a look at the application itself here. Just have to get it open. Okay, so this is Vegas Image, and you can see that I've already populated it with an image that I've started putting together here. And what you essentially are looking at is, of course, your workspace, and then you've got layers that you can add to this image. So in this case, I've got a layer of which is this image of the sunset. I've got another layer that I'm actually not using, which is just a splash of golden lower third graphic, and then a piece of text. And you can see that I can just add layers and turn them on, turn them off, and we'll get into more of this in a moment when I bring up another project. But for now, I just wanted to show you a couple of things. Across the top, you've got the project menu. Basically, this is where you could go to start a new or save and so forth. So that's just getting your bearings there. Undo, redo here. The select mode tool allows you to select your whatever layer you've got selected over here. So in this case, I've got my image layer selected, and then do some manipulations. The select tool is the one that you would use for actually making changes, whereas the pan mode tool is just basically lets me pan around my image. If I'm zoomed way in or something, I might want to pan to a different part of the image. I can, excuse me, I can do that easily with the pan mode button. Let's go back to the edit mode here, and I'm just going to make a quick little change. So let's say for whatever reason, I rotated my image. This next tool is the straighten mode tool. Is one of my favorites. It's such a simple little tool, but it's so useful. If I've decided that this rotation doesn't work for me anymore, and I want to quickly straighten this out to the horizon, I can just get the straighten mode tool here, and basically I just draw a horizon line, and when I let go, it automatically rotates my picture to match whatever line I drew. You can see that a little bit more easily if I do the same thing with the text here. So let's say I moved my text and I rotated it, and now I've decided that just doesn't look very classy and I want that text to be straight after all. I can get the straight tool here and just draw a horizon line right underneath the base of my text. And oops, sorry, I had the wrong image or the wrong layer selected. So let's select the proper layer and then do that again. And it straightens it right out. So that's a really actually a very handy little tool. Next to that is a cropping tool. So if you want 1:1 or 3:2 or whatever aspect ratio you want, you can do it either with these shortcuts or you can add in whatever aspect ratio you're looking for. So that's the cropping tool basically. There's a snapping tool here. There are alignment tools here. So if you've got several different elements on different layers in your project that you're building, you can use these to align to each other, align to a selection, to distribute them evenly, and so forth. Just tools to help you make sure that everything is lined up properly and you're good to go. Okay, let me move over to a different project here, and instead of trying to build this from scratch, I've already built it, and I'm just going to start turning on pieces of this thing that I've built so that you can get a little bit of an idea of how you would use Vegas Image to create a sophisticated composite. So with Vegas Image, you're creating an image composite, and you can also do, obviously, image editing, so correction, color correction, compositing modes, all of that stuff is built into Vegas Image. And so what I'm going to do here is just kind of show you this little project that I built. And in the course of that, we'll talk about some of the tools that I use to build it. So let me just turn on the bottom layer. I've got several layers in here, and very much like Vegas Pro or Vegas Image, Vegas Effects, the order of these layers dictates what you see. So if I have a layer on the bottom and I turn another layer on above it, then the one above it overrides the layer on the bottom. So it's just like a stack of papers, just like in Vegas Pro, the top track covers the bottom track, unless you do some sort of compositing. And I've already got some compositing going on here because I sort of pre-sized this image so that it didn't take the whole image, it just sits here. I'm going to turn that image back off for a second, but you can see how I can toggle images on and off just with the buttons here. And of course, if I hadn't already added these images or these layers, I could add them, and there are several different types of layers. So I can add an image layer, a text layer, and a solid layer if I wanted to overlay some sort of solid color and then make it a little transparent or whatever, give it a tint. There's an adjustment layer that would enable me to add an effect to that top adjustment layer, and it would affect every layer underneath it. And you can do a couple other different kind of layers here. So just remember that you've got an unlimited number of layers, and you can just keep going and keep adding them. Now, before I go any further, I want to mention that Windows very helpfully pushed an update on me this weekend, and when I came in this morning, I am having a little bit of stability problem with my machine. It doesn't seem to be affecting the stream for YouTube Live, so I don't think we're going to get disconnected, but I have been seeing some other strange things happen here, so we'll just get through this, and if that happens, we'll just deal with it. But anyway, back to the plot here. I've got this bottom image turned on, and a moment ago you saw me turn this image on. And what I want to do with this layer, whoops, I accidentally reordered those. What I want to do with this layer that you saw with the woman on it here is I want to make it appear that image is appearing on the mobile device, on the phone. So how do I go about accomplishing that? Well, the first thing I do is turn that layer on. And as I said, I've already resized it a little bit so that it's kind of in the right position and the right size to have her appear on the mobile. But obviously it's over laying places where I don't want it to. So what I've done, and what I would do if I was building this from scratch, is I would come over to my properties panel over here. And in here you see several things. I'll close these down just so you can see them sort of together and see what we've got here. First of all, there are layer properties. And here we could change the blend mode, we could do all kinds of different things. I'm just going to keep it at normal, but if I wanted to, for whatever reason, choose a different blend mode, I can easily do that from the drop down here. Okay, let's go back to normal mode, and we're just going to leave it at that for now. But you've also got things like scaling and rotation and essentially the numbers that I could change with these tools over here. I can also change by the numbers in the layer properties panel. Let's close that back down. And what I did to solve the problem of too much material here overriding more than just the phone is I added a mask. And so let me roll down the mask section here. And in this case, there are several different types of masks. And to add a mask, you just click the green button over here, and you can choose from all of these different types of masks. Now in this case, I chose the area mask, so I don't need to add it again, but if I needed to add a mask, that's how I would do it. And let me just bring down the parameters of the area mask so that you can see what we've got here. And then I've just temporarily overridden the mask, but let me turn it on so that you can see the results of my mask. Now I've masked that perfectly to the screen of the phone. And over here in the mask area, you can see the settings that I used. I could add curve to it if I wanted to. I could add softness to the edges so that it would feather out. I can make it more or less transparent. And so I've got all these kinds of controls here in the mask area parameters setting. And I can even invert the mask if I wanted to, for whatever reason, do that. So you've got all these controls, and really pretty straightforward and really pretty easy to use once you grasp the concept of what we're doing. Now I've also, later I'll come back to this image and we'll talk about some of the effects that I've added onto it. But let's just, for now, let's move on to show you what else I've done. Now notice if I turn this layer off, you can see that the original image has this wisp of smoke coming through, and there's smoke over the top of the phone screen. But when I turn this image on, this layer on, you can see that I lose that smoke. So what I've done is I've added another layer, which is simply a copy of the bottom layer. And that bottom layer, or that layer, looks exactly like the bottom layer, but what I need to do now is to mask out everything outside of that little wisp of smoke. And again, I came in, and in this case, instead of using an area mask like I did earlier, I added a mask, and I added a vector mask. A vector mask, basically, you can think of it as a Bezier mask. Like if you're familiar with Bezier masking inside of Vegas Pro, it's the same concept where you have Bezier handles, and you can curve the mask however you want to curve it, and so forth. Now, in this case, it would be a pretty detailed job to go and make a Bezier mask that matches this exactly. So I wasn't really too careful with it. But let me turn the mask on. I wasn't really too careful with it. You can see that I did kind of outline it roughly, but I still have a black background behind that wisp of smoke. But you can already see now that I've masked out all this other material, that I'm starting to get toward the effect that I wanted. In fact, if I hide those bottom two layers, you can see that now this layer has been masked out to show just that little piece that I want overprinting the phone screen. So let me turn those back on. So the problem I have now is that I still have that black background in there. And to solve that problem, I just added some effects. Let's see, let's get to the right image here, to the right layer. And when I roll down the effects parameters, you can see that I have already added a luminance key. So again, just like with the masks, if I click this green button here, it just gives me, a really impressive list of all the different effects that I can put on this track. I mean, I didn't count them, but there are a couple score of them. There are 20 or 30 or 40 different effects easily. And what I've done in this particular case is I came into the keying section, and notice all the different types of keying that you have available. Chroma keying, so if I was using a green screen, I could use chroma keying, color difference, color matte background, light wrap, and all this other stuff that is available to me under keying. In this case, I'm not going to choose one. I've already chosen the luminance key. And if I turn that on, you can see that it pretty effectively knocks out that background, leaves my smoke wisp in place. And you can look over here to see the different settings that I used to create that effect. Now you can still sort of see the outline in the background here, but in a few moments I'll show you some things that I did to further alter that image of the lady on the phone, so she won't even notice that. But this is the power of adding layers and using masking and using effects to knock out backgrounds and so forth, so that we could solve the problem of this wisp of smoke not showing up over the image the way we wanted it to. Okay, let's turn on another layer. I added a text layer. In this case, it's a 3D text layer, and I just added it to the image there. And then one final layer is another text layer. In this case, I used a neon preset, so that I now have sort of my final composite of all my layers in place. But I still want to do a little bit more to the image of the woman on the phone. And so let's go back to that layer. It's image 2. And of course, I didn't bother to name these layers, but I certainly could. I could say this is the lady layer, and this is the background phone or smoke layer, or whatever I wanted to call it. So I can name my layers and order them however I need to do. Okay, let's get back to the image on the phone itself. I felt like it looked a little too bright and too harsh given the sort of moody wispiness of the smoke in the background. So I wanted to add kind of a smoky, dreamier effect to this layer. So I select the layer, and I can close down the mask so we get those controls out of our way. And I've got the effects open, and you can see that I've used 3 different effects on this clip. I've used a contrast, I've used a bleach bypass, and a clouds generator. So let me just start rolling those down and turning them on kind of one by one so you can see what I've done here. You can see with this contrast layer, we're bumping the contrast by sort of crushing the blacks a little bit and pumping up the whites a little bit. And let's turn that effect on so that you can see the result. And you can see it made it brighter, but it made it more contrasty. So it was the contrast that I was going for, but I didn't want the brightness that came along with the contrast. So I'm happy with the contrast that it provided me, and so to account for the brightness, I decided to use some other effects. And again, to add an effect, you just click the green button, and then you can just add as many effects as you need to accomplish what you want. And also, the way I've done it here, I'm no image editing expert, so the way I've done it may be a good way to do it. It may not be the best way to do it, and there's a ton of different ways you could approach this problem. This is just the way I chose. We could maybe use blending modes to solve the problem, but whatever you've got all this stuff available to you to try different things. All right, so I'm done with the contrast. Let's close the contrast controls down. I like to open and close these controls just to kind of keep my workspace over here clean and uncluttered. So the next thing I added was a Bleach Bypass. And I don't think I really did anything to this except add the default settings. So if I turn that on, you can see that it already sort of darkens the image and kind of even makes it a little more contrasty even. And it's starting to fill in the dark areas, which may not be what you want to do, but in this case I liked that effect, and I decided to stick with it. But again, we can change the amount of bleach bypass. We can adjust these parameters however we see fit to do. In my case, I actually left them just at the default settings, so that's good enough for now. And then the final thing I did to try to get my final result here was to add some clouds. I took a look and said, okay, well, this whole thing has kind of this smoke theme going through it, so let's maybe add some smoke to the image. And to do that, I did it with the clouds plugin, the clouds filter. And here you can see the parameters of the filter, and I can turn it on, so you should sort of see the final result. And so now we've got this kind of, you know, bright halo-y effect going up here, but then down here it's kind of cloudy and murky, and some cloud over here. And I'll point out that before, when I showed this layer by itself, and you could still see that black before I added all the effects to the lady layer here, you can see that that's not even noticeable now. It just sort of fits right in with with everything else that I've done. But you can now see the final composite of the smoke coming across. It's over the top of the image on the phone, and it's that piece of smoke that was obscured by the image. If I turn that layer off, we can see how it was, remind you how it was obscured before. That layer now brings that forth. So get back to my lady layer here, and the clouds, again, I sort of just went with what was the default, but naturally I can come in and I can make whatever adjustments I want to make to the clouds. And, you know, I can come up with all kinds of different looks here. I could change the cloud color if, for whatever reason, I wanted to make it look a little bit more like the color of Vegas image. I can choose a red. And so I'm going to just come in and change all of this stuff, and, you know, just change my opacity. Let's say we change it to 0, so it just comes in. You know, just change it at will, and just get to where you're happy with it. So the only thing we haven't talked about on this left side is the content layer. And the content layer, let's close this one down and close the effects layer down. The content layer basically just gives you some information, like in this case, about the image that I used on that layer. But it can also give you some controls when you're in, for instance, the text layer here. So the content layer shows me what my text is, and now I've got my font parameters up, and I can, you know, change my font style, whatever it is I want to do. I need to select my font before I try to change the style, but I can come in and change the font, change the size, all the typical things that you'd expect to be able to do with an image editor, with a text editor. You can do basically here. But notice that the fonts, this layer property, I'm going to undo those changes that I made. But notice that the layers all have the same effects and masks and so forth properties that the other layers that we were working with have. So I could, if I wanted to, come up and add some effects to my text. So in this case, let's maybe turn off the drop shadow, or make the drop shadow bigger. You have to look kind of closely to see what I've done here. But if you look at the M and the O in here as I'm adjusting the size of the drop shadow, you can see some subtle changes going on in there. The spread of the shadow, so forth. I actually, since this is a 3D piece of 3D text, I have some bevel and emboss going on in here, and if I change that, again, you have to look pretty closely because it was a pretty subtle addition, but I can change the parameters of those controls as well. So the key point to remember, I guess, is that all of these layers are available to you. You can just add as many layers as you want to add. And they all have masking potential. They all have properties that you can check and work with. They all have effects potentials, and all the effects that we saw before are available even on this text layer. So, if I wanted to blur that text for some reason, I could add a blur to the text layer, and it just is. I'm working on the drop shadow here, so. But anyway, the point is that you have all these layers, and you have all these effects and masks and so forth, and all these parameters that you can use to make the adjustments that you need to make in order to get what you're looking for. So really powerful tools, and actually quite a bit of fun to work with as you start working your images and adding layers and so forth. So that was a pretty quick run through of Vegas Image from the Vegas Post Suite package. But hopefully it's enough to give you a solid understanding of how it works. Essentially, you've got a workspace, you've got some tools across the top of that workspace, and then you've got layers that you can add and different masking and effects controls that you can create the image that you want and add countless effects and create masks and all the rest of it. It's very powerful stuff. We've only touched on a piece of it. I mentioned keying, but we didn't really delve into the powers of the keying tool in Vegas Image. There's a lot more to learn, but really, this should give you a nice little overview of the general approach to working in Vegas Image. And if you haven't had a chance yet to see it for yourself, don't forget that you can download a free trial. And you would have 30 days to mess around with it yourself, and you get pretty good at it in 30 days and decide for yourself whether or not it's a useful tool for you. So again, that's Vegas Image. That's part of the Vegas Post Suite that was released a couple of weeks ago, along with the release of Vegas Pro 18. And I hope you enjoyed this quick look at Vegas Image. And next week we will be back with another Vegas Pro 18 related live event where I don't remember exactly what the topic is. I have to get Bree to remind me to remember that before I get on. We're going to be taking a look at some of the new features in more detail, or potentially some of the enhancements of old features that we added in detail. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed this quick run through of Vegas Image, and I appreciate you being here and looking forward to seeing you next week. Thanks. So long.